Oil moves the world. Every single day, the planet burns through over 100 million barrels of crude. And that oil does not teleport from Saudi Arabia to a refinery in Texas or a gas station in Tokyo. It moves on ships, massive ships called VLCCs, very large crude carriers. Each one stretches nearly 1,000 feet long, about 3 football fields, and carries around 2 million barrels of oil in a single trip. You might think shipbuilding has nothing to do with your life, but here's a number that connects it directly to your wallet. A VLCC carrying that oil from the Persian Gulf to China costs about $100,000 a day to charter. That works out to roughly $2 a barrel, baked into your gasoline, your heating bill, your plane ticket. Every time you fill up your car, you're paying for the ship that carried the oil halfway around the planet. So who builds those ships? Who decides how many exist? How fast new ones get made? And what it costs to use them? China held the #1 position in global shipbuilding across all 3 major indicators for the 16th consecutive year in 2025. Output reached 53.69 million deadweight tons, accounting for 56.1% of the global total. New orders hit 107.82 million deadweight tons, a 69% global share. For every 10 new ships ordered on Earth last year, nearly 7 went to Chinese yards. And the contrast: the United States constructs less than 1% of commercial ships globally. China produces over 1,700 large commercial vessels per year. The US, fewer than 5. Now you might be thinking, okay, China builds a lot of ships, but maybe they are just basic cargo haulers, cheap steel boxes, nothing special. That is where this story turns. China is not just building more ships. It is building the most complex ones. During the 14th 5-year plan period, China delivered 300,000-ton VLCCs, dual-fuel car carriers, and the country's first domestically built large cruise ship, the Adora Magic City. A cruise ship is one of the most technically demanding things any shipyard can build. A floating city with power plants, sewage systems, hotels, and theaters crammed into a hull that has to survive the open ocean. If you can build that, you can build anything. And in the green shipping transition, China captured over 76% of new orders for alternative fuel vessels in 2024. 3 out of every 4 green ships on Earth are being built in China. So if you still picture Chinese shipbuilding as cheap and low quality, that picture is 5 years out of date. Here's why Chinese ships cost less, and why that gap is almost impossible to close. A standard VLCC new build runs roughly $95 to $130 million. Industry estimates suggest Chinese yards price a VLCC about $10 million below Korean yards per vessel. That does not sound like much until you remember a major tanker company orders 10 or 20 at a time. 10 million times 20 is 200 million in savings. No CFO ignores that. But price is just the surface layer. The real advantage is structural. China is the world's largest trading nation, home to 8 of the world's top 10 ports, with the most comprehensive manufacturing base on Earth. When a Chinese shipyard needs steel plates, the mill is in the same province. Engines, electrical systems, paint, the suppliers are an hour away by truck. The entire ecosystem is local and tightly integrated. Steel alone accounts for about 40% of a ship's construction cost. And China produces more steel than every other country combined. The shipyards are surrounded by their most important raw material. Compare that to a US shipyard sourcing components from dozens of countries, dealing with longer lead times, higher costs, and thinner supplier networks. Then layer on scale. 6 Chinese shipbuilders ranked among the world's top 10 in 2025. CSSC became the world's largest listed shipbuilding company, holding 18% of global orders, with its production schedule booked through 2029. Lower input costs, a complete local supply chain, and the largest production scale on Earth. Those 3 things together are not a price advantage. They are a structural cost moat, and it is very hard to compete against a moat. So who is winning and who is losing in this reshuffling? The biggest winners are Chinese yards and the clusters around them. As of June 2025, major shipbuilding enterprises recorded a profit margin of 9.71%, the highest on record. That is remarkable for heavy industry. The second group of winners is global ship owners, who are following the math. Swiss firm Advantage Tankers, long reliant on Korean yards, placed orders in China for 2 307,000 deadweight ton VLCCs. Geneva-based Mercuria Energy signed contracts worth nearly $650 million. And Greek shipping magnate George Prokopiou's Dynacom Tankers is closing in on a VLCC program in China worth north of $1.4 billion. That is one Greek shipping family spending more on Chinese oil tankers than the entire annual commercial ship output of the United States. These are not ideological bets. These are the most sophisticated capital allocators in global commodities, and the math points to China. And who is losing? U.S. shipbuilding is in crisis, hobbled by obsolete machinery and a declining workforce. American yards currently produce less than 0.1% of global commercial tonnage. Not 1%, 0.1%. The largest economy on Earth has essentially no commercial shipbuilding industry. The United States, once the world's top shipbuilder, now ranks 19th. The decline traces back to the 1980s, when the Reagan administration ended the commercial shipbuilding subsidy program. Domestic yards collapsed, and the industry never recovered. In 2025, the Government Accountability Office reported that all 7 large U.S. shipbuilders surveyed had recruitment and retention problems. They cannot find welders, fitters, or naval architects. The workforce pipeline dried up decades ago. South Korea, the traditional number 2, is not losing exactly, but it is being forced to adapt. Korean builders held about 22% market share compared to China's 60+. They are retreating to the highest margin segments: LNG carriers, specialized military vessels, and technology exports to the U.S. Now here's where this connects directly to your life. When tanker markets are balanced, that VLCC day rate averages $80,000 to $100,000, roughly $2 per barrel of oil transported. But when the market gets tight, those numbers explode. In March 2026, tanker rates from the Persian Gulf to Asia blew out to $420,000 to $440,000 per day, about $9 per barrel. $2 a barrel to $9, that $7 swing flows into refinery costs, into wholesale gasoline, into diesel for the trucks delivering your groceries. You feel it at the pump and at the checkout, you just do not know why. Why did rates blow out? Because the global tanker fleet is aging. The order book stands at just 3% of the VLCC fleet, and about 30% of all VLCCs are at least 15 years old. Old ships retire faster than new ones arrive, and the world needs more oil moved longer distances. Who is filling that gap? China. Chinese shipyards led in VLCC orders received, with 13 out of 17 ordered globally in January 2026. Think about this from a systems perspective. If one country builds most of the world's oil tankers, and the world depends on those tankers to keep energy flowing, then that country's cost structure is embedded in the price of energy everywhere. If that capacity were disrupted for any reason, the ships would not get built, freight rates would climb higher and stay there, and you would pay for it every time you filled your tank. Has anything like this happened before? Yes. In World War II, American shipbuilding production exploded to 70 times its 1930s average, reaching almost 90% of global output. The U.S. proved that when national will meets industrial mobilization, capacity can scale at astonishing speed. But that was a different world. Liberty ships were simple steel and basic welding. A modern VLCC requires high-strength steel plates, complex piping, precision navigation, environmental systems, and millions of man-hours of skilled labor. You cannot sprint your way to a modern shipyard. It takes years. The U.S. is trying to turn things around. The Bipartisan Ships for America Act targets 250 new U.S.-flagged ships within a decade, and the Trump administration launched a Maritime Action Plan in early 2026 with shipyard investment and workforce reform. But the scale gap is staggering. Chinese shipyards have a manufacturing capacity of roughly 23 million tons per year compared to under 100,000 tons in the U.S., a more than 200 to 1 advantage. That is not a gap you close with a policy paper and a 5-year plan. So let me leave you with a framework. The next time you see a headline about oil prices spiking or shipping costs surging, ask yourself 3 questions. What ships are carrying that oil? Who built those ships? And who else could build them? Shipbuilding is not an obscure industrial topic. It is the infrastructure layer underneath global energy flow, the foundation of cost structures, the origin point of how prices reach your wallet. And right now, that foundation is concentrating at a speed the world has never seen before. In 2025, export vessels accounted for 89.6% of China's shipbuilding output. For every 10 ships built in China, nearly 9 are for the rest of the world. One country is building the ships that carry the world's oil, and the world is placing the orders voluntarily because the math works. That is not politics. That is cost structure. And when cost structure shifts at this scale, everything downstream shifts with it.